So welcome everybody to the very first episode of the Three Amigos podcast, which basically is three geeky metalheads drinking beer and talking about metal. With me today, we've got JP Revel and also Andrei Zaretski. We are going to start by opening some beers and we'll discuss some metal topics. So let's say, Andrei, what did you bring to fuel the conversation?
I'm taking it light. I'm doing a Tread Lightly by Muskoka, which just happens to be my favorite craft brewery. But as things might get a little bit heated, because I know a lot more about metal than you guys do, I have brought So I'll warm up with the Tread Lightly, which is a light beer, I admit, but I'm on the wrong side of 30. And but I do have a Muskoka Detours to wrap things up. But I'm sure you guys have something a lot more interesting. JP looks like he has a home brew going.
No, actually, no. I brought because Belgian beer is my favorite. So large bottle of Chimay.
Nobody's perfect.
As you know, Belgian beer is my favorite. I love it. I think they make the best beer over there. So yeah.
Awesome. And I brought to this conversation. I brought from Rorschach. I don't know if you can see that label, but all the information will be listed. I brought a Malevolent Benevolence Crème Brûlée Imperial Stout, which comes in at 12%. So that'll get me going. All right, guys.
It's going to be a heated conversation. Is that from one of your local Leslieville brews?
Absolutely, yeah. This is one of 12 breweries that are in walking distance of where I'm currently located. So it is a dangerous place to be or a really good place to be. So I'm going to just pour this guy. And I took it out of the fridge like an hour ago to let it come a little bit more to temperature, because I don't want to drink this super cold. Kill all the flavor. All right, we've all poured our drinks. So cheers, guys. Here's to the very first. Here's to the very first podcast of the Three Amigos show, and let's have some fun. This is multiple desserts in a glass here, right here.
Good. Enjoy.
Awesome. All right, so for our first conversation, we agreed that we were going to talk a little bit about thrash albums, legendary albums, influential albums, and so forth. And in this conversation, we're going to try to answer 4 questions. Number 1, what album was extremely influential for thrash music? Could be already a thrash album, maybe something earlier, but what really helped build thrash? The second question we're going to answer is, within thrash or thrash albums, what do we think is the most influential album? Not just to the thrash genre, but thrash obviously has influenced so many different music styles in the 80s and the 90s and beyond. So what was that really influential album? Obviously, we have to answer the question, out of all the albums that are out there, all the legendary albums, what is the ultimate thrash metal album? That's going to be our third question. And then finally, what is our own personal favorite? And maybe we'll have different albums for every single question. Maybe we'll have the same album for all these questions. And what I expect is that between the three of us, we're going to have a couple of albums that pop up a few times. But we'll see. So without further ado, let's talk about the album that we think was the most influential album to the creation of thrash. JP, I see that you're extremely focused and you have something to share. So, what was your headspace at? Like, what time era are you thinking?
I'm thinking of late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
And I was focused on the energy, the speed, and the other day, Andrei, you sent us a video of early Slayer. The very early Slayer, 1983, and it really struck me that for me, I believe that Motorhead was a huge influence on thrash metal. Obviously, it could be Overkill, it could be, the Ace of Spades, but I think Motorhead, with their speed, the energy, the I don't care attitude, had a huge influence on thrash metal. So that's my pick for the album. You can pick Overkill, you can pick Ace of Spades, but this is my pick. Like early Motorhead, end of the 70s, early 80s, I think had a huge influence.
Well, I mean, it's definitely like at the end of the day, what is thrash metal? And I'm gonna define it for me, and I'm sure that you guys will disagree potentially, but for me, I think thrash metal is really all about that re-energized heavy metal that the new wave of British heavy metal brought to us. Whether or not Motorhead was part of that can be debated, but then also combined with the attitude of punk and early hardcore music. And if you asked Lemmy before he passed away, what kind of music is Motorhead? Well, I think we all know how Motorhead started every single show, and it was like, we were Motorhead and we play rock and roll, right? So they did bring that mix for sure. Andrei, why is JP full of shit?
This is a two-part answer. I will admit, because I don't pay attention to things, I didn't really interpret this question as most influential for the creation of thrash. Sure. I interpreted it as, what's the most influential album for thrash in general. So I actually do agree with JP. If we're talking about the creation of the genre.
Sure. Because we'll come back to influential thrash albums anyway, so we'll come back to your pick in a bit.
I do agree with Motorhead. I think from just a speed, an intensity, and a vocal delivery, they absolutely nail it. The little galloping rhythm that is in pretty much every single Motorhead song. Ace of Spades is just my absolute favorite. This is one of the few times I could say that he's not full of shit.
Surprisingly. So I definitely agree that that Motorhead is one of the massive influences on thrash metal. I mean, obviously, people that discover thrash metal probably do that through Metallica first. And we all know that Metallica covered a bunch of Motorhead songs when they were in their early days. Honestly, if I had to pick between Overkill and Ace of Spades, I think also because when Ace of Spades came out, the metal world was already in a different space than Overkill. Ace of Spades, I think, is 80, and Overkill is 78, 79. I would pick Overkill. I think the title track on that album is definitely proto thrash.
The drum part is.
Oh, this is a warning here. We have to put a warning here for everybody before JP gets out of control. JP is a drummer, so JP tends to over.
A terrible drummer, though.
So just as a quick background, we didn't really go into it, but I think it's good that we went straight to the conversation. But the three of us, what do we all have in common? I think probably our love for Iron Maiden. That is the number one thing. And then JP actually drums in an Iron Maiden cover band. Andrei sometimes plays for that same Iron Maiden cover band as the keyboard player, but also plays in a prog metal band. And I don't know how to play instruments. So we're all the same, really. But anyways.
You know your share of metal so much that it's almost like you play it yourself.
You know what? I played a mean recorder back in the day in school, but that's about it. And that can make me go into a pagan black metal band at one point.
Oh, man.
So, JP, I don't have a recorder here in Canada, but I'm sure we can fix that. But JP, talk about the drums of Overkill for sure.
Oh, yeah, the double kick pedal is a typical signature of thrash metal. So for me, there was a huge influence on thrash. The intro, just play the record. Yeah. This is very heavy. There's the energy. It's very raw. It's very loud. This is typical thrash metal. So absolutely, Motorhead has had a huge influence on it for me. Sure. Yeah.
Another thing that we can't forget about Motorhead is that also, if you look at the traditional heavy metal bands in the late 70s, early 80s, they were rock stars. They looked like rock stars, right? They were big. They were colorful. Spandex everywhere. Sure, a lot of thrash bands, specifically in Europe, the Teutonic thrashers from Germany, they definitely went, leather and studs and what have you. But if you think about the big thrash bands coming out of the States, they look like regular folks, like ripped jeans, t-shirt, leather jacket, not like superstar clothing. Again, something that Motorhead definitely also kind of pioneered. Or if you look at the cover of Ace of Spades itself, where they have a bit of a country twist to it, that's what they're dressed, right? It's dressed down, denim and leather. That's it. So
what's your pick, Jasper?
Yeah, for my pick, I was looking at it, and so I wrote down first like 3 things that came to mind. Motorhead at Overkill was one of the things that came to mind for me for sure. I was also thinking like, when was the first piece of music that has that distinct thrash riffing sound? Actually, I think one of the very first examples of that is Queen with the Sheer Heart Attack album, specifically with Brighton Rock. The song, like in the middle of that song, there's this all of a sudden out of nowhere, there's this really cool thrash riff. But if I had to pick like, what for me was really the album that accelerated the evolution of heavy metal into thrash, then and this is where Andrei is expecting me to say Venom, and I am gonna say Venom. I'm gonna say Welcome to Hell, the debut album of Venom. For me, is that album specifically? Witching Hour is a song that could have been on the first Metallica, first Megadeth, first Slayer albums, and that album is often considered as like one of the first black metal albums in the early first wave of black metal, which has nothing to do anymore with what we think of black metal today. But that album gave birth to extreme metal, and I think that was definitely all of a sudden, a lot of people call Venom part of the Nwabum, which fair, that's true, but they are extremely different than all the other bands that were coming out. Like there was no finesse anymore. There's no twin guitar harmonies, melodies, whatever. It's just raw power. And so for me, Venom, Welcome to Hell is gonna be also one of the first big albums that, beyond the Black Sabbath stuff, all of a sudden very on the nose evil imagery, which again, especially if you think about bands like Kreator and Destruction in Germany, or later Celtic Frost from Switzerland, that image comes straight from Venom. So I that would be my pick. I think it's two votes for Motorhead, and I give Motorhead a half a vote. I think Venom is really up there, but you know what? I am more than happy to give this award to Motorhead, because they were let's not forget, several years still before Venom. Let's move to proper thrash. And so so the question is not yet what do we think is the ultimate album, but what do we really think is the most influential album? Andrei, why don't you give us your thoughts here on the most influential thrash album?
Oh, sure. So I was torn on this one. This was because there's 2 directions that I could go with. Okay. One is going with obviously Rain and Blood, because in my mind that is just a textbook thrash as it is. It really just completely reinvented the genre when it first came out in terms of speed, intensity, production, and commercial success. I know Pleasure to Kill had a similar vibe to it, also on the other side of the pond, but just everything about Rain and Blood when it first came out, it had that ultimate energy of that hardcore kind of hardcore punk feel, mixed in with the metal, the really aggressive vocals, and really redefined it. I think it set a new benchmark for anybody who wanted to play thrash metal. But having said that, while it was accessible, I think Master of Puppets was the album that really redefined the genre, introduced more melodic elements, and really kind of let people know that thrash isn't as one-dimensional as I'm gonna get hate for this, but not as one-dimensional as what Slayer put out. It had melodic elements to it, and that really opened up the door for a whole wide variety of thrash artists, like Overkill, like Anthrax, they were there before, but you know what I mean, like the evolution and all this amazing thrash metal that we saw in the late 80s, 90s, 2000s. I think without Master of Puppets, and the sheer popularity that it commanded, it never would have happened. So that's that's my pick for the most influential. Although, as much as I'd love to give it to Slayer, it's
Well, hey, we've got a couple of categories still coming, right? So, I mean,
for sure.
the Slayer name dropped. I mean, obviously, we referenced Slayer earlier when we were talking about how Motorhead influenced stuff. I don't think it's going to be the last time that we mention that band in this conversation. With Master of Puppets, sure. Was it still pure thrash? That can also be debated, and it's less raw, it's more melodic, but it's definitely the album that it brought thrash to the elite level of metal, right? Before, people were not necessarily, the broader mainstream was not necessarily taking bands like Metallica serious, but all of a sudden with Master of Puppets and the tours that they did to support that, then all of a sudden the whole world changed. I would say that if we're sticking with Metallica, if I look at most influential, I would probably go to Kilomole for that, just because I think that the rawness of that brought forward a lot of thrash, but also I think that Kilomole maybe influenced again genres like a black metal and starting death metal a little bit more. One album that I know that it's one of those, it's almost like a hipster metal album, because everybody always lists it as one of the most important thrash metal bands or albums of all time, but few people I know actually listen to it a lot anymore. But still, Celtic Frost to Megatherion from Switzerland, again, is it pure thrash or is it like blackened thrash? That can be debated, but with songs like The Usurper and Circle of Tyrants, big influence. My pick for this one, for most influential, and I actually just like yourself, I was torn about this. I had to go back to it over and over again. I actually did go with Bonded by Blood.
I knew
the Exodus album. I know you knew.
We all knew.
But here's the thing.
Worst kept secret.
So I was listening to again the entire album over and over again. I mean, obviously it's the album of Exodus, and it has like all their favorite or all their most famous songs on it. And then there were None, Metal Command, Piranha, A Lesson in Violence, obviously, and the title tag Bonded by Blood. The song Exodus as well. And if you listen to that album, you really start to hear in a bunch of the riffs and the drumming, the ingredients for what would become like death metal with bands like a Possessed later and a Bathory and what have you, and black metal as well. And also like the vocals, Exodus, out of all of the early Bay Area thrash bands, the most extreme vocals. And so I just think that that was an album that definitely paved the way for a lot of extreme stuff to come. And then also it was released in 85, but it was actually recorded in 84 at the same time as Kilomole. And it's like, if you compare it to Kilomole, Bonded by Blood is way ahead of that.
Yep.
But then if you compare it to to what it came out with, like 85, that's when that's a year before Master of the Puppets, Amongst the Living, and a year before Rain and Blood. And I agree that those three albums all are, again, ahead of that album. But if you think about that, in just 2 years at that time, a lot changed. So for me, comes to most influential, not the best, not my personal favorite, not the ultimate, but I think when it comes to like really influential, that's gonna be my pick. But JP, what do you think? There we go. Boom.
And I'll explain why.
And just for the people that are listening to this, JP is holding Master of Puppets by Metallica.
Look, it's not my favorite album. I stuck to the definition that you sent, most influential. I think, if you listen to introduction of the album, it became cool to put classical guitar into a super heavy thrash album. You listen to some Sepultura later, other bands, Bathory, this classical guitar. There's some, if you listen to Master of Puppets, this song, there's a slow part in the middle with a cheesy solo, but still twin guitars, all of it.
Cheesy solo, man, I swear to God.
But still, I'll have to agree with Andrei. This is not my favorite album, but I do believe it's the most influential production-wise. And as I talked about it, a lot of instruments came together whether it's classical guitar to electric guitar to the vocals, all of that. I have to admit that this is a very influential album. A lot of metal artists talk about it. The track list, the impact it had on 1986, what it meant for later years.
Yeah.
You know, that's my pick.
And not to forget, like, for a lot of people out there, the first quote-unquote extreme metal album that they'll listen to, right? I mean, for myself, like, you know, I did not grow up in a household that had metal in it. You know, I wasn't born to a mom and dad that were already listening to metal, and unlike people in that situation, they might just, you know, from get-go are introduced to more heavier stuff. But like a lot of people out there, as a very young teenager or preteen, you know, in the 90s, I would start to listen to first heavier rock, and then realize that some of the heavy rock bands that I was listening to, like Metallica in the mid 90s, had a much heavier past, and then I started discovering that, and then Master of Puppets is probably the first album that, you know, you get introduced to. Obviously, the title track. A lot of people know the song, you know, not even people that never listen to metal. People probably have heard of Master of Puppets. It's a phenomenal song. Let's be honest. Like, it's a masterclass in songwriting. It captures you. It's a great album. Like, no doubt about it. It's a good album. Andrei, I think you want to say something.
Oh no, I said it was flawless. Sorry, I was pouring a beer.
Yeah, no, for sure. The sound of that album is really great, for sure. And for me also, production is one of the key things in the next topic we're going to talk about, which is what we think is the ultimate thrash metal band out there. But before we do
band or album?
Sorry, did I say band?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I did. I've noticed that I do that a lot. I do that a lot. I notice that when I'm like editing videos, like when I'm editing interviews with people, like I'll say albums instead of songs, and like bands instead of albums. I don't know why, man. Like, it just happens. But anyways,
that's all good.
You had me scared there for years.
I know, me too. Man, I was like, that's like the homework.
All right, awesome. So, conclusion. You know, if we are a council of three and majority wins here, as the three amigos, we say that Master of Puppets was the most influential thrash album, which means that we believe that not only did it impact thrash after it was released more than any other album, but also it influenced heavily all genres outside, or all subgenres outside of thrash for the metal world. Awesome. Well, I'll drink to that. Yeah. Let's have another drink, and that will be the last one that I last sip. So I'm gonna grab another beer after that. So cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We are halfway through the conversation, and it's time for me to pour my second beer. I am going with a Three Kings. Not Three Amigos, but Three Kings.
Oh, I love it.
And this is a Saison with hibiscus and rose hips, which is from Radical Road, which is one of those 13 breweries around my corner. This is literally 2 minutes away. It's around my corner. My favorite craft brewery from Toronto, which is a ridiculous metropolis these days for craft brewing. But Andrei alluded to it earlier. JP, you are I mean, we all try to do some stuff, but I've brewed a little bit in my day. But JP, you are like a proper home brewer these days. Tell us about that.
Proper is too much. No, I started about a year ago. Bought some kits to brew my own beer with some ingredients, grains, hops, and I bought the equipment to do it. Usually, I can brew one batch at a time, which is about 15 liters. Enjoy it. Some hits.
Yeah, we all enjoy it.
Some hits, some misses, as you all know, but it's fun.
Let's get back to the questions at hand. We had two questions, and just to recap, our first question was, what was the album that was the most influential to thrash? And we heard some great suggestions, but we all kind of agree that Motorhead was definitely the band to think about. Our second question was, what was the most influential album? What was the most influential thrash album? And we landed on Master of Puppets because we believe that it changed the face of thrash metal, but also it influenced so many other genres out there. My more hipster choices were shut down by both Andrei and JP.
Wait, I didn't shut it down.
But all right, so that brings us to the third question, and this is it's going to be an interesting one. But what do we think is really the album of thrash? Like, if you have to show to somebody who doesn't know what thrash metal is, what is that album that you're gonna play for them? JP, you had to wait until the last person to talk on the previous question, so why don't you kick us off?
Okay, so as an introduction, I'm just gonna say that I've excluded Rust in Peace from the pick because it's not fair to any other album, any other metal album. It's not fair to anything else. So, and on a more serious note, I know we had the conversation before. Is Rust in Peace really a true thrash metal album? You know, there's a lot of debate. So
it definitely took that melody and that rejuvenation that Master of Puppets brought, and it took that to the extreme. But that also meant it went away from the raw thrash that we knew.
100%. I fully agree with you, but as an introduction, I just wanted to say that so it's out of the way. Mm-hmm. I'd say my pick, and Andrei brought it up before, it has to be the Slayer album, Rain in Blood. You know, we can talk about it at length. The energy, the production, which is superior to anything you had heard ever in 1986. The track list, the rawness.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that we can talk at length because we've already been talking longer than the album actually is, because that's less than 30 minutes, which is pretty crazy.
You can anything about it. You guys all know about it. Every thrash metal lover is gonna know about Rain in Blood. I think for me it's the ultimate thrash album. It's hard to argue. I can't anything else. Just play the record.
No, for sure. I'm gonna
play the record and look at the.
And by the way, JP, look at that record again and look at the back there. What as a lover of Belgian beer, what stands out for you?
Stella Artois.
Exactly. So it's an interesting fun fact. So I believe that picture, and I could be wrong, but I believe that picture was taken at the Heavy Sound Festival in Belgium, which was in the early 80s, 85 probably when that picture was taken. This was I think it's Young Metallica played that festival. It was a small at the time it was big for metal in Belgium, which was underground, but there was only there was like 5,000-6,000 people there, and this was like they treated this Belgian festival treated all these bands like gods, right? So Slayer in a later interview said that they remembered that they were picked up at the airport with a special limousine and stuff like that, and as a thrash band in the United States. Now Slayer, obviously they don't they're not playing anymore, but they became one of the biggest bands in the world of metal. But at that time, they were playing clubs in San Francisco and Seattle and Los Angeles, right? So they definitely remembered that. And there's a really great picture of the same photo shoot where they were posing with the mayor of this little tiny, town in the middle of nowhere, Belgium. It was this old guy in an old suit with these young guys. Unfortunately, that year that they played the festival, there were some of the metal fans who at night after the festival was over continued to party in a local cemetery and exhumed a few graves, and that was the end of that festival. So that's really unfortunate because Manowar played there, Dio played there, Metallica played there. It was 3 years that it happened, and then that was it. But I think you make some good points, Andrei. What are your thoughts? Are you gonna say for the second time that JP actually has a point, or do you think that we should look at a different album?
So I'm not gonna comment on his first point about Rust in Peace. I'll leave that. I'm gonna leave that to our next question.
Sure.
And we can address it then. I think we both kind of know where that's going. I'm gonna I wanted to say Rain and Blood as well for this one, because it really is textbook thrash. Like, you look up thrash metal in the dictionary, it's got to cover Rain and Blood. But if this was the 1980s, I would definitely agree with you. But I think thrash has evolved considerably since then. And yes, Master of Puppets had a huge influence on it, but yeah, Master of Puppets also kind of took the textbook thrash thing and diverged it into a couple of directions, from neoclassical, traditional heavy metal to you name it. I think where Slayer kind of showcases a similar diversity but still stays true to that really textbook thrash thing is on Seasons in the Abyss.
Oh,
I know a lot of people don't love that album. I think personally
it's a great album.
My favorite Slayer album, because when I listen to Rain and Blood, yes, it's like 28 minutes. If it was a 45-minute album, I would get kind of tired of it. That's a blasphemous statement, but I mean, the nonstop dilate up to 11 does wear thin. I love how on Seasons in the Abyss they have a couple of slower tracks, like Dead Skin Mask, like the title track, where they slow it down, but at the same time it's still so thrashy and so heavy and aggressive. For me, when it comes to ultimate thrash albums, that would be my pick. Do I consider it to be the best thrash album ever made? Definitely not. But I think if I were to pick an album that best defines every single different subcategory of thrash metal that ever was, I think Seasons in the Abyss kind of falls right in the dead center.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I mean, I think that Seasons opens with one of the best Slayer songs of all time, with War Ensemble, right? So that is
unbelievable song.
That I still think we actually the three of us were at Slayer's farewell concert in Toronto. They played that song there with such a at such a ferocious intensity. It was, for me, the highlight of the show, I think. It's such a good song. So it's interesting that, even though you guys disagree on what is the greatest album of all time, the greatest thrash album.
Slayer,
sorry, not greatest,
Slayer.
but the ultimate thrash album. So clearly the question, what is the ultimate thrash band, may have been easier because you guys agree on Slayer.
I think I know. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I said I think I also know what the number 2 band on that list is. Just looking at JP's t-shirt.
Kreator definitely has a couple of, I think Pleasure to Kill definitely is up there. I mean, it is the ultimate classic of Kreator, I would say, although that Extreme Aggressions, I think, is an underrated album. But I actually, my pick...
what did you pick?
My pick was also Raining Blood. I'm going to agree with JP. Like, it's a couple of reasons for me. It is to the point, for sure, and I hear what you say, Andrei. Like, 9 out of 10 songs are just like, pedal, how you say that, belt to the metal or whatever, like, full speed ahead.
These would go to 11.
Yeah, exactly. From the opening scream of Angel of Death, I mean, that's just such an iconic scream. And it's interesting that this album is less than 30 minutes long, but the last song, Raining Blood, which I think is just such a phenomenal song, is quite long. So if you think about it, the average length of all the other songs is very short. But I mean, there's obviously also like Postmortem, that is hardly a full song. But here's a fun fact, by the way. So when promotional copies of the cassettes were sent out to radio stations and magazines at the time, the entire album was shorter than one half of the cassette. And so they just put the entire album on both sides of the cassette. And they actually had more. They actually had more material already ready, but it was actually Rick Rubin, the producer, who said like an album maximum has 10 songs, and so you cap it at 10. Rick Rubin's production at Def Jam Records, predominantly hip hop in the 80s, but then took on some metal, and everybody now knows all the great albums that he worked on. The production is really what sets apart Raining Blood for me, because it is so clear, it's so high quality, but at the same time, it didn't take away the rawness of this. Because when I then look back at Exodus, Bonded by Blood, for example, if you would take that through such a production, it would probably lose the charm of Bonded by Blood. The same with Kilomole. Like, Kilomole is a phenomenal album. I think it's still one of my favorite albums of Metallica. But if that was properly produced, it would lose part of the magic, and I find that very interesting. So yeah, for me as well, Raining Blood. But it's clear to sit where we sit on who is the ultimate thrash band. Slayer is the response to that. Let's be honest.
So I'm gonna add a little bit of fuel to the fire, just because I'm a dick. So by choosing Rain and Blood as the ultimate thrash album, are you guys implying that some of the mid-tempo and slower songs are not really a proper definition of thrash?
Maybe. For me, I think so, to be honest. Like, and that's also like, when I was thinking about these things for the first time, one of the things the one thing that is missing on Raining Blood, but everything else I think is so good that it kind of balances out not having this one particular thing, is thrash. Although predominantly, a lot of the thrash metal albums, even today still, they tend to talk about, society falling apart. In the 80s, you could clearly tell a lot of these albums had like this scare of a Cold War era with potential nuclear warfare, right? A lot of the albums are about a post-apocalyptic life. There's a lot of death and gloom on there, but one element that most other thrash bands and albums also have is that fun piece, and that's what I miss with Slayer. So I like the fact that almost every thrash band has that song about just thrashing out to thrash music or drinking beer and partying, and that is one element that I think is missing. That's like the one objection that I have, because if somebody asks me to describe thrash, the party element of it, the moshing part of that of it, has to be part of it, right? Because thrash metal really brought punk's moshing, or the pit from punk and hardcore to metal, right? Before thrash, there was no mosh pit on early power metal or what have you. So that's a piece that I think is missing with Slayer. I think Slayer is taking itself always too seriously, and I think thrash shouldn't always take itself too seriously, because thrash fans don't do that. We like to drink beer, we like to party. That's why, I'm wearing a t-shirt of Municipal Waste, which is like, okay, that's maybe more crossover than pure thrash, but still, they bring that party element to it. And they have a lot of songs that are politically motivated, like so much thrash is, talking about real issues. But the ability to take a step back and party and don't take yourself too seriously, I think, is something that's cool about thrash. Kreator does that on some songs. Destruction does that. The Tankard only does that. But Anthrax does that a lot. Overkill does that.
Too much for Anthrax.
Sure. Because here's the thing. The three bands that hardly ever did that are Slayer, Metallica, and Megadeth. Yeah. Like, there's no party songs. Except with Metallica on the Kilomole album, right? There's a couple of there's a couple, but once they became serious, so that's my beef.
No, you are right, and yeah, I think Metallica has just Whiplash, which is literally about
Metal Militia, also a little bit.
That's true too. Slayer, you know what? I've never actually stopped to think about that, but yeah, I think you're right. I think Slayer is definitely one of those very image-driven, like. They have their mantra and they stick by it no matter what. I find that in the last 10 years, when you see them live, they have loosened up a little bit. I find Araya he's having more more of a kind of loose approach to it on stage. He's joking around. He's not all about, hey guys, we're rockin' Slayer.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. You got me thinking. Are there more bands like that? Because like obviously you have your black metal bands and whatnot.
Sure.
But one of the things this is a little off topic, but I was talking to a friend of mine who used to work with some local bands as a tour manager, and he found that the difference between North American bands and European bands, specifically like Scandinavian ones, and how serious they are when it comes to metal. And he said that he actually had like an email that was sent to the band that he received. It's like, you know what, guys, like, you're really cool. We really like you, but here in Sweden, we take our metal seriously.
I mean, to be honest, like, I respect bands that are willing to not take themselves too seriously once in a while a lot more than bands that like refuse to let go of the image. And the more a band is trying to be super serious, the more funny it really is. Like there's like, if you
Immortal.
like well, yeah, no, exactly. I was gonna go there. Like, I mean, if you take a step back, I mean, I'm a big you guys know this, I'm a big black metal fan, and JP is too. Andrei, I know that you go in and out, depends on the bands, but we all kind of have an affinity to black metal, and it's such a diverse genre. But every single black metal band, if you take a step back, is a little silly, and the more serious a band is trying to be, the more funny it almost becomes. So when you have a band that goes like, like, I can also just kind of have a good time. I think that is very disarming, if you will.
Do you think that Immortal is serious when they do those video clips in the mountains?
I think they.
I mean, I just always, whenever I see a Norwegian black metal band shoot another video in like a snowy forest, I just always think about the couple that is just hiking. And they're like, hiking through the forest, and they just see like this band recording their video clip with like playing instruments without power. So it's not that it's actually making any music.
I know, that's why I think are they even serious? Like,
no, I don't know. I mean, a bit like I get into it. I like it, and I understand that for certain bands, the mystique around a band is very important, and that's all cool. And therefore, I would not bring this up as for me, like as a beef with black metal. Like if we were talking about the ultimate black metal band, I would not want to have a band necessarily that makes a little fun of themselves. But when we're talking about thrash, which is for me a genre of like, when I go to a thrash show, I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to drink beers, party, and hang out. And so I always appreciate it when thrash bands bring that. So maybe that's a good segue for us because, hey, simple math, Raining Blood, ultimate thrash metal album. Maybe this is a good segue for us to go into what is our personal favorite, because all of these elements are going to come up now. Like we're gonna focus more on those. So JP, you haven't spoken in a while. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, no worries.
Some things that you're thinking about your favorite thrash.
Yeah,
album.
Thank you. I was so obviously Raining Blood would have been up there, but I went back to when I was a teenager, when I started to love metal, especially thrash metal, which was one of the genres I started to love earlier on. Even funny enough, before heavy metal, I went.
Yeah, same.
It was a tough pick, I have to say. So I'll have a runner-up. Pleasure to Kill by Kreator, just because of the track list. I think the track list is awesome. I love it. Pleasure to Kill, The Pestilence, Under the Guillotine. So many good songs on the album. However, the production is awful.
I can't even.
I love Kreator. I love Kreator. If you want to talk about new thrash metal, I think they're way ahead of anybody. Like from 1989 onward, they're the best thrash metal band, like hands down.
Yeah, agreed.
Best. 1986.
Okay.
Look, Melee was 18 when he recorded Pleasure to Kill.
Yeah.
Like when I was 18, I was a dumb teenager drinking beer and doing nothing with my electric guitar. So my pick, I'm gonna go back to the album that made me love thrash metal. I think the production is phenomenal. I think the track listing is great. The riffs are phenomenal. I'm gonna go to Arise by Sepultura. I love this album. It's very close to my heart. That's the album that made me love thrash. I said it before, but yeah, I love the songs. I love the production. If you watch the DVD of their tour, it's a fantastic album. They're not American.
Yeah.
It's not European thrash metal, but I think it's a phenomenal album. You know, I love Kreator more than Sepultura, but that's
Awesome.
It's better.
No, I think this is great because we've spoken mostly obviously about American and German thrash with a few things around it, and then within America, the Bay Area thrash scene is probably the most iconic one, even though Slayer is not even part of that. But Metallica, obviously, Testament, Violence is coming from there, Death Angel, Dark Angel, like all these bands. And then we've talked a lot about the German bands, Kreator. We talked about Destruction. I mentioned Tankard earlier. There's a lot. Sodom is one of those bands as well. People, we almost forgot the fact that there was this third really, really influential scene, which is the Brazilian scene. I mean, there were thrash bands everywhere, like in Russia, in Belgium, in France, which is where we're traditionally all from. But and Toronto had a fantastic thrash scene. But if you think about like influence, the Brazilian thrash, absolutely, not just Sepultura. You had Sarcófago, you had Dorsal Atlântica, great bands, cool.
I need to
Andrei,
write this stuff.
You have to.
I need to write this stuff.
Hey, we're gonna. No worries. I'll throw every band that we touch on, their biggest hits. I'll throw into a Spotify playlist so people can follow
amazing.
up with on this podcast with a great thrash playlist. Andrei, I think we all know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, before I point out the obvious, firstly, JP, amazing pick. Mm-hmm. I have not listened to. Okay. We'll get that one out of the way. That's my favorite thrash album. I don't care what people say. It's a thrash album.
Just for the people that are, Andrei, before you go into it, for the people listening to this podcast, Andrei is already getting extremely excited about the fact that JP was holding Rust in Peace by Megadeth.
Rust in Peace. I mean, it's one of my favorite old-time albums. When I got my vinyl record player, that was the first album that I purchased. It was that and Summer in Time by Iron Maiden, which were my two favorite albums. Sounds absolutely amazing. I know there's a little bit of controversy about whether it qualifies as a true thrash metal album, but if you listen to the opening riff of Holy Wars, I dare you to say that that's not thrash.
No, absolutely.
Because it definitely has elements. It's branched out, but if you listen to some of the other albums that qualify as thrash, from the East Coast to the revival of thrash in the 21st century, I think it really has diversified as a genre. And the fact that Mustaine brought this really technical element to it with the melodic elements of Marty Friedman, I absolutely love this album. What I also wanted to point out was that I didn't even think of Sepultura when I was doing that, and I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, no, it's easy to overlook, right? I mean,
oh my god, It's so unbelievable.
Yeah.
Great choice, guys. Now, I don't have anything more to add, but like Jasper, you have to diversify this.
Sure.
I'm really
No, yeah, just before Jasper goes on, just wanted to say, yeah, look, rest in peace. That's what I said at the very beginning of this interview. I said I'm not going to bring it up because it's unfair to any other metal album. Like it's.
So here, this is where I completely disagree with JP, because I think that Rust in Peace, I think it's a great album. I think it's my second favorite Megadeth album, but I think it's a really good album. That's no doubt. But for me, doesn't make by far my top 5 metal albums of all time. But that's gonna be a conversation for another time, I think. Hey, here's I'll leave you guys with this quote I'll leave you guys with a quote while Andrei's strangling himself with his headset because he doesn't agree with what I'm saying. But I interviewed Daniel Decay from Exciter the other day, and he also said Rust in Peace turned thrash into thinking man's thrash, I think is what he said. Like, and that's what Andrei is talking about. Like, Rust in Peace brings an almost progressive technicality to thrash that, I mean, which existed before, but never in the spotlight like Megadeth. Like, there are technical or progressive thrash metal bands out there in the 80s already, but none that nowhere near the success of the recognition that a Megadeth got. And yeah, Rust in Peace is a great album. There's no doubt about it. I just don't think it's the greatest metal album of all time. I mean, as long as Dave Mustaine is your singer, you can't be the greatest metal album of all time. There, I said it. No matter how good the riff is, no matter how good the solos are. But no, it's a great album. For me, very similar to both of you guys. Obviously nostalgia. It was a big part of this, right? I mean, the albums that you used to listen to as a kid. Because I was thinking about, and if I think about the albums that I play the most now, today, first of all, I'm a big fan of Teutonic Thrash, and not just Kreator and the bands that we called out, although I think that my favorite Kreator album is probably their 2017 album, Gods of War, which is a phenomenal album. And I think we can all be, anybody that loves thrash metal, has to be super excited about all the phenomenal albums that came out in the last 20 years. Like, it's been really, really great, both new bands and legendary bands coming back. But obviously, I'm also going to go with a more classic album here. By the way, my favorite Teutonic Thrash metal album of all time is Possessed by Fire by Exhumer, which is like an underrated German thrash metal band. Check them out. It was really tough because, like I said, if I look at the bands, the albums that I played the most, they're actually compilation albums, and I think that's not fair. Like, I think that, for example, The Greater of Two Evils from Anthrax is a phenomenal compilation. I think the live album of Tankard from 1990 or 89, Fat, Ugly, and Live, is maybe one of my favorite live albums of all time. It's just such a good thrash live album. But for me, my favorite album of all time in the thrash world is Ride the Lightning by Metallica. It's my favorite Metallica album. It's the one that I got into as a teenager. It was like my first. After I obviously got Master of Puppets first, but then I went to Ride the Lightning, and just like everything just fits for me on that album. It's still raw enough to be considered proper thrash, even though there's like with what's the
Fade to Black.
Fade to Black. There's like a first ballad on there, but it's such a great song, and then Escape, Trapped Under Ice, creeping fucking death, like I actually I had like this I remember when I was 12 years old, I had this little little notepad, and I was trying to write some poetry and whatever, and I was keeping track of quotes that I liked and some lyrics I liked, and I started writing down all the lyrics of the song, Ride the Lightning, and so on, and Fight Fire with Fire, and I was like reciting those in my room, and my parents got really scared that they thought that I had like suicidal thoughts and what have you. But for me, that is the album. Like the artwork is great. The logo of Metallica on that album is phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's my pick for my favorite album of all time in the thrash.
Yeah, that's a great pick. I think it was my, it's my favorite Metallica album.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't pick it because I think Master of Puppets, from what I've read, what I've heard, is more influential.
Yeah.
But yeah, I fully agree with you. I think the track list is phenomenal. Yeah.
And you know what? Going back to your pick, JP, for 1 second, because I mean, Sepultura, sure. Like I knew Sepultura when they, I was introduced to Sepultura. Like I assume both of you, when they put out Roots, when that became an international massive hit. My favorite Sepultura album would still be Chaos AD, not Arise. But
is it really thrash? For me, it's my favorite. Yeah, I agree. So for me, it's my favorite album, but
it's no longer thrash. I agree with that. It's the start of groove metal. Yeah.
I remember I was 16 and I was watching the clips at 2 a.m. in the morning in France, and then all of a sudden I see Roots, Bloody Roots. I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, and I loved it. And then I started asking friends at high school, and it's like, oh, I have that old CD of like Arise. I remember, and he got me he copied the CD into a cassette. And he gave the cassette, and like Arise, like for me, a revelation. It was like my world had changed, like my life had changed. That's why I go back to this, because this is really the album that changed my life from a metal perspective. I think it's just
queuing up my my Spotify. I need to remember to listen to this one.
and you know what? Production is phenomenal. The riffs.
For sure. It's the album that turned Sepultura from an amateur Brazilian band into a force to be reckoned with. It's as simple as that. And guys, I don't know if you saw this, but Max cut off his dreadlock.
Oh yeah, I saw that the other day.
Hold the presses. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, hey guys. So as a recap, we all kind of agree that Motorhead, with either Overkill or Ace of Spades, kind of, the most influential thrash album. Although I'm gonna plug myself, I still think that Venom is pretty amazing. But and so we also agreed as the three Amigos that the most influential thrash metal album was Master of Puppets. JP and Andrei agreed on that one, and then ultimate thrash metal album. JP and I agreed that this was Raining Blood, so Andrei will just have to agree with that. Our personal favorites are Rust in Peace for Andrei, Arise for JP, and for me it's Ride the Lightning. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. Remember to check out the Spotify playlist that accompanies this podcast if you want to just have a great thrash party. And we will be back soon for another conversation, more metal and more beers. Thank you, JP. Thank you, Andrei, and thank everybody.
Thank Jasper for organizing this. Thank you, man.
This is so much fun.
Na zdrowie.
Na zdrowie. Good to see you guys.
Nasze zdrowie.
Alright, so if you like that video, click right here to see more content like it and subscribe to the channel.